You're interested after.
Yeah, first.
You're done with everything after.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples in the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roosterton. We're delighted you could join us here tonight, both in person and virtually, for the Winnipeg launch of Strange Loops, the latest book from Liz Harmer. You may applaud. We are genuinely so excited to have Liz here and delighted that she could fit a stop in Winnipeg into her tour schedule. If you've read her work before, you know what an exceptional writer she is, and Strange Loops is no different, taking her craft to another level. She's a beloved writer here at the store, so there was a lot of excitement when this new book was announced, and we're so thrilled that we'll be able to hear a little bit more about it from another author we're enormously fond of here tonight. And I'll tell you about your host for the evening in just a moment. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and thank both Knopf Canada for publishing this book and ensuring that this evening could take place, and also our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival who are helping to co-present this evening. You'll be hearing a little bit more at the close of the event from Festival Director Charlene Deal, but suffice to say, any opportunity we have to work with the Writers Festival, we immediately leap at. It's always so wonderful to partner with them. This book is described as enthralling, a story that burns with intensity and daring by Iain Reid, and it is a book that, as the promotional copy accurately mentions, does crackle with intensity and is just full of incredible ideas and the inimitable prose that we've come to expect now from Liz Harmer. Her first novel, The Amateurs, was a finalist for the Amazon First Novel Award. Her award-winning stories, essays, and poems have been published widely, and she has been a fellow at both the Breadloaf and Sewanee Writers Conferences. Raised in Hamilton, Ontario, she now lives in Southern California. I'm now going to unprofessionally interject before I introduce the host, just to mention that there was one housekeeping note I did not bring up, and that is there will be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions immediately following the conversation. To do so, I will circulate with this microphone. This is not to make any judgment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that those folks watching at home can actually hear the questions. And if you are one of those folks watching at home, please just write your comments or questions into the chat, and we'll be sure to put them to Liz as time permits. Unprofessionalism aside, your host for the evening, Seyward Goodhand, has stories that have been shortlisted for the Writers' Trust McClelland and Stewart Journey Prize and a National Magazine Award, and longlisted for the CBC Short Story Prize. Her first book, Even That Wildest Hope, published by Invisible Publishing, was a finalist for the Margaret Lawrence Award for Fiction and the Eileen McTavish Sykes Award for Best First Book. It was also longlisted for the 2020 Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic, and is, coincidentally, the McNally Robinson and Winnipeg Free Press Book Club choice this month. So you'll have more opportunities to hear about Seyward's incredible collection in just a few days. But for now, please join me in welcoming Liz Harmer.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, John. I have to say I got increasingly nervous the more you spoke, which is good. It's good to be a little nervous. And I wanted to thank McNally Robinson and Thin Air is that Winnipeg International Festival, and Seyward Goodhand, who is my very dear friend as well as being an incredible writer. And I'm so grateful for her doing all of these things for my book and also putting me up for a week. So thank you, Say. I'm going to read a very, very short portion from the opening of the book to give you a taste of the book and not to spoil anything, and then we will have our conversation. Francine, high school. Francine, present. The key was still under the clay pot on the concrete front stoop, and that pot made an unpleasant scrape as Francine moved it. The plant inside had long dried and shrunk and was no longer identifiable, but the light over the outer door had flared on when she approached, and the hedges on either side of the walk were trimmed, which meant that her mother had been keeping the place up, regardless of her many threats to sell it, rent it out, abandon it altogether. On the security pad, Francine keyed in the 6 digits of her parents' anniversary. 2 short beeps chimed, indicating disarmament. She looked back out into the near total darkness of the gravel drive. The young man, the boy, was still in the passenger seat, his face illuminated by his phone. She turned again to the task at hand, the inner door's tricky latch and its sticky lock. "What's up?" the boy said, coming up behind her now. He put his hands on her shoulder supportively, or perhaps proprietorially. For months, he had been trying to touch just these parts of her body, any part of her body, and she pretended not to notice when he brushed against her. When, overcome by some enthusiasm, he touched her on the arm. Out of long habit, she dodged these hands, but then turned around to kiss him. He was so unlike Jamie, who never seemed to want a thing, who, while gentle, had no passion for her, was self-sufficient and lacking in desperation. The boy, though, was tense with desire. He pulled her bottom lip into his mouth. His mouth was soft, was sure. She had spent so much of her life wanting. The newness of him was half the pleasure. The other half was how purely and openly he wanted her. "Come on," she said, pulling him inside the kitchen and toward the cupboards, where she found several dust-filmed bottles of Merlot, and way at the back, half a Mickey of peach schnapps. The Mickey was 15 and nearly 20 years old now, purchased by her when she was a teenager, an old transgression that with time had lost its charge. She felt now in all her gestures a regression. She was moving uncertainly, the way a young woman moves, while this boy was moving like a man, opening cupboards, looking for glasses. When she pulled the cork out of one of the bottles and wine gurgled darkly into one glass and then the other, she couldn't keep her hands from shaking. "Don't be scared," he said. "I'm not scared." I'll stop there.
Thank you. That is loud. Thank you, Liz, for that. And thank you all for coming as well. I've been friends with Liz for 10 years, and so I'm so grateful to get to talk to her about her truly excellent second novel. And I wanted to say a few words about the novel. It's a novel it's not hard to read. It's got an extreme coherence when you're reading it, and you know what it's about. It's very propulsive and collected and coherent, but it is hard to summarize, like all very good novels. But I'm going to do my best to give you an idea of what it is. And also to talk about the fact that it's a departure from your first novel, The Amateurs, which was a speculative novel about these ports, these technological ports that people could step into and disappear into and pursue, fall into their nostalgia. And this is not like that. This is a kind of domestic novel, a psychological deep dive, has an element, very realist, has an element of domestic tragedy. So we're going to talk about why you wrote in a new register for the second novel and what compelled you to do that and what you enjoyed about that. But I just wanted to give a sense to people here about what the novel's about. So there are these twins in the novel, a brother and a sister, and their condition is that they're far too entangled in one another. They can't escape one another. They don't know where one begins and the other ends. And this is like a terrible psychic prison that they both exist in and can't seem to escape. They're kind of addicted to each other and are kind of dark shadow selves of one another. Francine is the sort of son of the novel. Let's say Philip is the moon, the sort of secondary main character. And they each try to escape each other through various kinds of transcendence. So Francine seeks escape through desire, Philip seeks escape through religion, but they follow each other wherever they go. And so some of the strange looping behavior in the novel is that Francine, her trajectory is that she had this very troubled affair when she was young with an older authority figure that she met through Philip's Christian youth group and a pastor. And then when she gets older in her 30s, she repeats this behavior, but she's now the one in the predatory position. She's the teacher having an affair with the student. And so it's very, very morally complex and turgid, the novel. and very, very enjoyable to read and very, very bold experience. So maybe we'll begin with the first thing I was interested in. Why did you, what made you want to take such a departure and register in mode with this second novel from the first one?
I wish you would always explain my novels to me. Your explanations are always more beautiful than anything I could say. I didn't set, well, I don't think of myself as a speculative writer, so I didn't set out to write a book about portals and time travel, and then I just did. So it's more like, for me, The Amateurs was the anomaly, at least as far as the kind of writing that I was doing. But I also have trouble sticking with one thing. So I am writing a novel right now that's set in the Mars habitat, which is, I guess you might say, sci-fi. So I guess I am a speculative writer, but I read all kinds of things, and I think you just write what you read. And then sometimes you start a thing and it has an energy and you just want to follow the thing you're writing. So I don't know if that's a very satisfactory answer. I don't know.
Yeah, you just have this part to you that, yeah, I mean, you write creative nonfiction as well, and personal essays. And this has some of the flavor of that. It's got some of the kind of intellectual intensity and curiosity and realism of that. The novel's also open to different discourses. So Francine is working on a PhD on Mary Magdalene. You've got lots of epigraphs in the novel. Some of them to kind of intellectual, theoretical people like Jean-Luc Nancy and Anne Carson, and then some to Annie Ernaux, more autofictional people. So this novel feels more, I don't know, open to the world and to reality in a way, in a sense, than maybe The Amateurs or other things you've written. So maybe that's a question to ask about, like, how you write realism, but how do you, are you thinking of this as like a really closed work of just purely the imagination, pure fiction, or are you wanting to open its seal up and let the real in ways that you didn't with your first book?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this actually because it was a much more tortured experience to write. It was a much more tortured experience to write Strange Loops because it's so much more about real people doing, so okay, none of them are real, they're all fictional, but it's more like real people doing destructive things, and it's difficult to be inside the mind of somebody who's that destructive. And so I think for me, the feeling of writing it was much more harrowing. It was much more like, maybe this will do me harm to write. Whereas The Amateurs felt more intellectual. It felt like more of an exercise in a puzzle. And sometimes now I'm worried about that because those are two very different ways of writing a book. And I was working on this Mars novel recently, and I was complaining to a friend that I didn't feel the kind of passion and confusion that I felt while I was writing Strange Loops, which felt like energetic and exciting and interesting and weird. And then he was explaining to me that there's, he's a screenwriter, and he was telling me that there's an actor's paradox that maybe some of you know what it is, where, now I can't remember whose paradox this is, it's somebody famous. But the more the actor feels what they're doing, the less feeling is conveyed to the audience. So now I'm worried that I've had too much feeling in loops and it won't be conveyed. So it's like, how do you write a book at all to influence anybody to feel anything? Yeah. That's the problem we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me when, Yeah. Structurally, you're exploring the kind of limits of perception here and delusion in this novel, and you do this sometimes by narrating the same event but from different perspectives. The reader gets access to this event multiple times, and it seems different to the reader each time. Mm-hmm. Is there a definitive, and one example of this, say, is there's this really, or one example when these two things sort of come together, the two perspectives come together, is when you have these twins, Francine and Philip, they're at their parents' cottage. And Francine is heavily pregnant, as I am right now, and she's trying to come in the door of the house with her toddler, and there's a wasp nest under the porch, and there's wasps kind of flying around through the cracks in the porch. And she's saying to her brother, just get out of the way, I want to get away from the wasps. And he holds out his hand, and there's a bug in his hand, and he says, what's wrong with you? These aren't wasps. But then she feels them buzzing all around her. And then you don't know.
Is it a bee or a wasp?
Yeah. And so does the reader get a definitive version of it. And these kind of uncanny, really great uncanny moments happen a lot in the novel. And does the reader get a definitive access to events here?
I don't think so. Like, I guess each character is passionately striving to an event that, or to like an account that would be correct or true. But I was thinking about in dysfunctional families, I'm sure none of us have encountered any, but no, just in the abstract. In a dysfunctional family, sometimes somebody will have such a remarkably different memory of something that happened. And that happens in all families, but it can be especially destructive in a dysfunctional family where you are holding on to some version of events that the other person actually can't remember at all or remember so differently. And that's a super fascinating, like, especially events that might form your identity. And so I don't think there ever is a way to access the truth of a memory, which to me at a certain time in my life was unbearable. Like it was unbearable to me that there were so many things that would pass us by and we'd only have our memory of it to count on, and our memory was so unreliable. And then in a good relationship, a good entanglement, you would create the world together and you would affirm reality and the truth, but in a destructive one, it would be riddled with lies and confusion.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, there are lots of bad kinds of intimacy here. And the main one is between these twins who, I mean, they just experience, it's a fascinating relationship. This sibling relationship, thank you, this twin relationship. And the twins, they kind of, like they have there's no private space for them to go when they're around each other. They see just the worst of themselves when they're around each other. And they're very, wrapped up and trapped in each other, but it doesn't ever turn into, it doesn't seem to turn into affection. Although when they're on their own, when they're distant from their twin, they think, oh, I love my twin. But the moment they're around each other, it's like this terrible mirror that they're seeing each other in. And also some of the other intimacies, or the way that Francine seeks intimacy in her romantic relationships. It seems less about closeness with the other person and more about like a desire to be annihilated by feeling by the other person. But there is an example of good intimacy in the novel, which is the friendship that Francine has with her friend Maggie. And it's not a perfect relationship. They often misunderstand each other, but there's a moment, and Francine is sort of being very open about all the things that she's done and how she feels about it. And Maggie just kind of goes there with her and says, sort of understands that she's been seeking what Maggie calls the real thing. And there's a moment of positive intimacy. What do you need for a good kind of intimacy? And what is, because there's definitely a bad intimacy is something that is deeply explored here. What's the difference? I mean, they're close, the twins are close, they get each other, they know each other better than anyone, but why is it so bad?
What a question, Seyward. Thank you for that one. Okay, I'll start with Francine and Phillips. What I think the nature of their disgust for each other, their difficulty with each other, is that they are both filled with shame. And they're filled with shame because of the kind of mother that they have. And so they can't bear to see the other person's face looking so much like them, looking so ashamed, revealing the vulnerability they feel themselves. So I think there's something so stripped bare, it's unbearable to see how vulnerable the other is. And that's a form of, I mean, sometimes when you see someone's vulnerability, what you feel, crushed with love for them and like a desire to protect them. But in this case, it's just shame. And I am trying to, I'm on a little research path of trying to read about love and think about what it means to really love someone and what good intimacy is. And I think you have to find a way to let misrecognitions not become, not obsess about them, but to see them as like necessary. Like, so if you love someone, you want them to remain themselves and you want them to remain inaccessible to you in a certain way. You don't want to absorb them. You want to maintain their like integrity as a person, right? And then you can be good mirrors for each other because you bring something different and respectful and affectionate. So I think boundaries are obviously important, and there are no boundaries in this book.
There are no boundaries. No, I mean, that's something that that comes across in this novel and is so. I mean, it just stimulates thought in this novel. Is the how important privacy seems in these intimate relationships. You know, to maintain some kind of privacy there. I want to talk about this mother figure. I'm gonna try. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about this mother figure who's kind of, if the novel has a villain, she might be the villain. It's not clear that the novel doesn't have a simple villain, but she's a really interesting and powerful character. And she seems to lord over, like she seems to enjoy the way that her children fight with each other, and to kind of lord over Francine a little bit, and to accuse her of very conflicting pathologies that Francine could never possibly resolve. So on the one hand, she says, you know, Francine, your main character, is too powerful, right? This is a constant refrain in the novel. She's too powerful. Other people are oppressed by her personality and her power. You know, she doesn't know how her moods affect other people, etc. And then on the other hand, she's accused constantly by her mother. Her mother, you've made the mother, so they come from a secular liberal family. The mother is the breadwinner. She's a professor. And she's constantly accusing Francine of not being productive enough, right? Francine dropped out of a PhD. She can't quite finish it. Francine is actually kind of struck by a paralysis, actually, in the novel, right? She can't commit to or finish things or commit to things. And her mother's constantly bringing this up and kind of humiliating her. You're losing, you're wasting your gifts, you're wasting your potential. And the mother also, of course, claims to be a feminist. And I wanted to ask you, what were you sort of exploring here by making the mother the oppressive character in the novel? The father's very passive, and the mother exerts a lot of sort of malign force in the family unit, but it's a very different kind of force from, say, classic patriarchal force. Heterosexual male dominance and the pressure on women to play a secondary, more laboring kind of role in the family unit. That is it's not the kind of force that the mother is exerting on Francine, but it's a very negative force nonetheless. So what was the kind of, what were you thinking through here, feeling out here with this mother character?
Like, why did I make a strong female character a villain?
No, but what is the kind of pressure that the mother is exerting, and what are you thinking about that kind of pressure?
Well, I guess I find it interesting that I find it more interesting to think about less simplistic versions of how patriarchy afflicts us. And so Victoria is a woman who on the one hand is super accomplished and looks like, I guess she's like a second wave feminist, but she's not sex positive. She's very slut shaming. She's really hard on her daughter, especially hard on her daughter. And I guess I find that really interesting to think about the way she's internalized misogyny and inflicts it on her daughter, and the way that that's a system rather than something that happens exclusively to one gender identity, I guess. So I think it's just really interesting because both of the female characters are having trouble. They're not troubled by their gender. They're not troubled by being women. They don't even see themselves as women. And I think that's a version of being trapped in a patriarchal system, that they don't see that they're victimized or part of caught up in,
Yeah. So there's this extra, Francine can't just be whatever she is. She's got to prove something.
Yeah, she's in a battle with her mother. The real battle is not between her and her twin. Her real battle is between her and her mother, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping you could say something about the title and the concept of the title, Strange Loops. It's such a great title, and it does have this, you thought, there's a real sort of conceptual backdrop to it. So it's about, like, the novel is structured in these loops. There are various plot movements, one in the past, one in the kind of middle time, one in the present, and they're all looping into each other. But also this idea of looping is about mind and subjectivity, and how minds themselves and subjects are formed in relation to each other. And there's a really great loopish moment I thought I would read out as an example about this. And this is, I think it's a beautiful example of this, and it's between Francine's two kids. She's got two sons, Red and Simon, and they're playing with each other. And this is the moment, and I'm hoping you can just talk about what a strange loop is, okay? No, 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 Red shrieked and threw a toy at Simon's cheek. Simon put his hand to his face and turned calmly, his eyes filling, to look at Francine. He held his cheek and stared at her until she ran over to hold him in her lap. He did it, Red said. It was him. But I saw you, Francine said. I saw you throw a train car at your brother. It was him, Red said. Francine held Simon, shushing and rocking, her son so big that his legs dangled over her bent knees. Mummy, Red said, pleading, and so she gathered him into her lap too.
Oh no, that's such a cry.
So it's like, who threw the truck? Like, who did throw the train in this sibling, very, very average sibling entanglement between two kids?
Yeah, I mean, that's like your classic projection situation, right? Where you're like, you just clearly did the thing, and now you're telling her that your brother did the thing you just did. Yeah, I was so interested in the way that we co-create each other's realities, and we do that, with the people who are closest to us, to our siblings and our close relatives, and then to our spouses. That when you can't cope with your own capacity to harm, so you just have to project it on someone else. I was thinking a lot about projection and scapegoating, right? You project and then you exile and kill. As like an ancient kind of practice of healing the community. So as for strange loops, there's a book by a philosopher called Douglas Hofstadter called I'm a Strange Loop. And he gets really interested in that book. He comes up with this thought experiment about a world where instead of individuals, we had pairs. So everybody was part of a pair. And then in that situation, it'd be really tragic if you were just an individual. And it's like the pair was the individual, like it was the single unit, and it was twins. And he was thinking about the way that you create consciousness, not on your own, but through the world and through the other people in the world to reflect you back to yourself. And that was the sort of psychological metaphor that I was thinking about as a strange loop, that we are all kind of in looping relationships with each other and feedback loops. And then I just went crazy and made a bunch of loops in the book. There's a tornado, everything's gotta be a circle, everything's gotta be a spiral.
all these good sibling relationships.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about another sibling, because these twins have an older brother, and he's hardly there. He's like this absent, kind of somewhat benevolent absence, sort of over the relationship. And I wanted to ask you about how you conceive of secondary or even tertiary kind of characters, and how they function for you and how you conceive of them. So I'm thinking in particular of these two characters. One is this older brother who's not really there in the novel very much, but he does at some point offer this really, really important revelation to Philip. And then the other character I'm thinking about is Philip's wife, Crystal, who's, in some sense the novel could function without these characters, but they do offer something quite important. Crystal kind of offers, the novel is so turgid and tangled, and you're really, it's focalized really closely to the perspectives of the third person perspective of the character that you're with. But Crystal, will sometimes come in and offer these kind of clear summaries of what's going on. Or she might say, is Francine okay? She seems like she's on a collision course, or something like that. She's on a constant collision course. And you're like, oh yeah, that is a summary of that is what Francine's doing. Or, you shouldn't talk like this in front of the children. And then, you're like, that's true, we agree with that. So how do you think of, you're very close to protagonist, your main characters. But how do you think of other characters? You know, really, really distant tertiary state characters. What do you do with them? How do they work? How do they function?
Well, and I think Maggie, the friend Maggie, is also another example of this. And actually, I think they have a really important function in this book because so if you read it, you'll see, you know, the crackling with intensity. These are some really difficult people, and they're in like really embarrassing, humiliating, horrifying, life-destroying battles with each other. Like, so in that one scene, with one of the scenes with Crystal, you know, there's this fight thing going on. There's a storm outside. Phillips punches a hole in the wall. He can't even go over the threshold. It's a haunted, like it's all so dramatic. It's a haunted house. How am I gonna, there must be demons here. You know, Francine is like taunting him. Nobody can get along. And Crystal's just trying to do a jigsaw puzzle at the cottage. And she's just a normal person who doesn't come from this place. And she reminds you there's a world outside of this nonsense. And I think also they give me an opportunity as a writer to offer like, maybe, yeah, like a summary statement or also like a moral statement. Like Maggie's the one saying like, hey, you know, this is what you're doing is wrong, right? Like, how do you not know this is wrong? And so that means that the novel can know that what she's doing is wrong and it doesn't get so absorbed in identifying with her because she's doing something so immoral. And so I wanted there to be a space for other voices to come in to offer those explanations and offer that light of the whole world is not this cottage, this dark cottage that seems to be demon infested, metaphorically speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful because there isn't a narrator, right? There isn't like some sort of distant, more omniscient narrator who's going to come in and tell the reader what the center of the novel is or what the mores of the novel is. And one of the most sort of uncanny examples of this, or the times you feel this most uncannily, is when Francine, when she's an adult, she meets up with this older authority figure that she was with when she was younger. And they have this kind of, it's not a reconciliation or a confrontation, but it's a kind of, she wants some kind of, she wants to see the truth, or she wants some kind of answer from him. But they have very different accounts of what happened. So her account of what happened is that it was a relationship. And his account of what happened is that this is a terrible mistake that he made, and it was a terrible moral error. And the novel doesn't, you know, no one comes in and takes the reader's hand and tells you which it is, right? Is this something you resist when you're writing, or that you just naturally don't gravitate to? You know, so like that kind of you know, authorial,
like a moral explanation.
Yeah, it's kind of authorial interjection where the novel's going to come in and like tell you this is the center, the moral center of the novel.
That's an interesting one that you brought up because somebody mentioned to me when they read that passage that they were so caught up with Francine's view of things that when Howie said that, they were like, oh, right. Like this is not necessarily the way that things happened. And so I think that just having two characters have different accounts gives the reader a chance to realize that like the protagonist they've been following may not be correct. I had a really juicy thing to say about the rest of it, but no, what was it? Oh yeah, and also, so the other thing that has been really remarkable to me about the reaction, so this is a youth pastor who's who when Francine's 17, he's in his 30s, and he has, you know, they have a sexual relationship. And at some point I offhandedly said, like, by any measure, this is a villain. And then somebody was like, well, he's not a villain. He's not a clear villain. And it's true that I was trying to write something that would really be just about how the capacity that ordinary people have to do something really harmful and wrong. Like it's possible for all of us to do something really bad, instead of being about a predator, like a clear predator who had been grooming someone and trying to take advantage of them in a very conscious way. But he still feels he's done the wrong thing. And so I was trying to wrestle more, rather than trying to, you know, I'm not interested in, like we were talking the other day, like I'm not interested in like serial killer narratives or narratives of people who are really evil in a way that's like, that seems irredeemable. I'm interested in, you know, most of us who are capable of doing something wrong and then having to live with the regret of having done that. So yeah, so the reader also is like thrown into the situation of just having to figure out, like, and they have to decide for themselves, or we have to decide for ourselves where our own lines are and what we would forgive and what is forgivable and what is what is villainy, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's, and you know, Francine is this, herself obviously is this kind of mixed character in that regard. She's culpable and she's, you know, she's victimized and she's culpable in the same novel, right? It's not easy. And there's a related tension in the novel between a kind of freedom that the characters have, that Francine has in particular, and a kind of you know, determinism. You might call it a tension between kind of action and paralysis, you know, as well as Francine really free. Sometimes there's a line that you have where it's something like she's having an argument with her parents, and they're in a public place and she thinks about standing up and toppling the table, but she doesn't. And instead she stands up and she lets desire take the place of action instead. So there's some sort of inability to act. And I just wanted to point to a couple passages to ask you a little bit about this tension. So this is a passage I have seen, and I think people have, I don't know if I saw it in a review or in some kind of response to the novel, and it's one of those passages that I think can stick out to a certain kind of reader if they really want to make sense of the novel. They want to find they want to do a particular kind of reading of the novel that gives the novel coherence, one of those thick passages, you know. And this is the passage. Francine is talking. She says, I look at my life and I think that ever since I was a girl, and now that I'm a woman, a wife, a mother, there are grooves in place for me, like one of those toy stick figure hockey games where the players can only move within the small path cut out for them on the plywood surface, but that's it. Back and forth, a little wiggle. I mean, who is my life for? The family, monogamy, right? As if I'm just an essential atom in this system, and this system needs to be upheld. Mm-hmm. So I've seen this pulled, right? Like, it's kind of one of those, like, maybe this is the key to the novel. Maybe this justifies Francine's behavior. Maybe this is, you know, but then the novel, it's not quite as tameable as that, right? Or it doesn't quite rest there. There's another moment where Francine is thinking, and she's thinking about all the things that she's done, and she says, now the joke was on her. She thought she'd been on a path of pursuing her desires, but here she was, just another woman ruined by sex, an independent woman ruining her life all on her own. And so you have these two tensions, right, between like, is she a figure in a hockey game that's just like in these set grooves, or is she an independent woman ruining her life all on her own, and or both are true, or how are you thinking through this tension here?
Well, I mean, what is our life for? I mean, like, what, I guess I feel like she couldn't bear sort of being stuck. She couldn't bear like that hockey game, which I can't even bear to play. I can't stand that those things are stuck in those grooves. I know this to be like something in my nature that I want to be free on the rink.
The rink of life. Beautiful. Beautiful.
We're in Canada. So but you know, even on the rink of life, there's, I guess, whatever you call the, you know, I don't play hockey. I don't know the single
There's no rink for you. You're awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we are contained by, you know, we're limited. We're in bodies and we're in time. And I think part of what she wants is to be maybe not human, not quite human. I think she doesn't want to contend with what it is to actually wrestle with the life of a human. And she wants some escape route. But there is no escape route except one way, and that's not ideal. So I feel like she does make an error in her desperation for freedom, because she just winds up trapped again. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the tragedy, I guess, of the book. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's there's a sense in which she wants to just be a pure mind or something. Mm-hmm. But then also is trapped in her ruminations and in her mind at the same time.
Her mind is the enemy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But also she just wants to be alone with it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question and then we'll open the floor for questions here. And this is a question, it's a very short question. I don't know how I would answer this question about anything I've ever written, so here you go. But here you are. What do you hope readers experience in this novel?
Oh. I like it when a reader can't put the book down. I like it when they feel freaked out and they don't know what's going to happen. I just like to have created some suspense. I was trying to write something that would feel fast. And so for this book, that's what I want. I want it to feel fast, but then I also want you to feel really devastated at the end. So I just like gave a very intense look at the audience. I'm sorry, that's the only option you have.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so
much for the conversation. Okay, we're gonna open up questions from the audience if there are any.
And if there are, just raise your hand and I'll wander over with the microphone. And if you're watching live on YouTube, just write your question in the chat. Were there any questions? Oh, there we go.
Thanks. No, it's a very, very kind of basic ignorant question.
Okay,
And maybe you even mentioned it, mentioned the answer already, but I'm wondering where the book is set and whether that has any bearing on what the events are.
Oh, that's a good question. So it doesn't say where it's set, but I know where it's set. It's set in well, I grew up in Hamilton, so it's set most of the book is set in the west end of Hamilton near McMaster. And the characters own a coffee shop, which is a coffee shop I wish that I owned. So I just, as I do in every book, I steal someone else's business and I give it to my character. And then the cottage they go to is, I think, in Huron area, and I happened to go to a cottage that my family rented where tornadoes, and I never knew tornadoes could come to Ontario. And then we had tornado warnings, and it was like very interesting and beautiful and weird. So I set it all there, and then, but then I wasn't raised wealthy, and so I had to imagine what it would be like to be a wealthy Canadian. So I did a little bit of, fictionalizing there. But yeah, it's mostly set in Hamilton. There's a section that's set in Perth, Ontario. Yeah, it's a Canadian novel.
How long did it take you to write the novel? And you said it was difficult to write, so did you feel devastated at the end or happy to be free of it?
Oh, I really like that question. I wrote the first draft really, really fast. And I was in a habit, so the difficulty of the writing was such that I had to be in a certain mood or I couldn't write it at all. And I've said this to other people, but like I had a special playlist that I had to listen to, and I had particular passages of books I had to read in order to get into this mood, which was like kind of doomed love and tragedy. Lots of intense music. And so I would descend into the mood, and then I would go in there for a while, and then I'd come out, and I couldn't just like pick it up and write it whenever I wanted to, but it did go fast. It kind of built its own momentum. And I was devastated by the ending. And is this embarrassing to admit that the ending, I have like read it a lot of times and it always makes me upset. Like I feel upset with myself. And upset in a good way. I don't know. Is this like being trapped in your own mind and like being addicted to your own mind? Maybe. But yeah, I think. Wow. Now I built the ending up way too much. No, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think when you read it. I wasn't as devastated as I thought I would be. Yeah, I guess I was.
Yeah, you've talked about. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you've talked about wanting, in the writing of this novel, wanting to kind of get an unmediated experience, and I wonder if part of what you wanted was to get somehow get past yourself, when you were, get past your own, whatever psychic walls or hesitations or.
Yeah, I was trying to get past. I was trying to get past my own self-censoring or something. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's two things. One is perhaps with the ending, you could come out with part 2. Follow up to that. The other is, I don't know if this is just a crazy saying, but writers write what they know. Are there characters that you have borrowed from, or life situations, or I don't know, maybe even read about that kind of injected your characters?
Yes. I don't want to say too much more about that, but yes, part of why it was hard to write was because some of it touched on not necessarily events that happened to me, but psychological, true life psychology that I was living with. And a lot of that happened metaphorically. So I was trying to say something true about a certain psychological way of being in a family, but a lot of it is a lot of the events were stand-ins for events that aren't the same. So it's not. Am I getting uncomfortable with this question?
The plot is very different.
The plot is very
The
different.
events are not as
The events are not as, but there are the characters and like that kind of relationship I'm familiar with. Yes, I mean the brother sister sibling relationship is familiar.
We do have a question from YouTube, which is, how does it feel being a Canadian writer who lives in California? Is it lonely? And is the writing community welcoming?
Oh, it is a little lonely. I don't, I've been there 9 years now somehow. I really fought feeling at home there, which probably wasn't the best idea because I got stuck there for a while and it would have been nice to feel at home. I do have a great community of writers there, and I do feel like there is something that feels very different than my Canadian writing community feels really different than my American writing community. I can't quite put my finger on exactly what that is. It is probably some kind of cultural, national sensibility thing, which I don't dare speak up in this crowd. No, I'm just kidding. No, it is a bit lonely. And I do feel like I miss being in Canada, and I would like to be in Canada because it just is my home. But now that I've been there so long, it's also my home. And I can't, as I always joke, you're not allowed to complain in Winnipeg about living in Southern California in March. You're just not allowed to do that. So I'm not going to do it.
I'm curious, you said you had to kind of get into that space with your dismal playing list and such, and I wonder, as a writer, what was it like to come out of those writing sessions? Like, was it hard to dig back out, and did you have a sort of reluctance to go back in again?
Well, I think what I ended up doing, so I was raised with a lot of church, and I think what ended up happening is it became a little bit of a demented, slightly perverse religious ritual, because it's like there's some songs and then there's these repeated passages that I'm reading, and now here I am doing this thing, and now I'm coming out of that thing. And so there was a part of me that really enjoyed that, but I think maybe not super healthy part of me. And then the question of like, was it hard to come back, like to sort of rise back to the surface? Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to make that transition to my ordinary life, because I'm a mother of 3 and I have to do a lot of very ordinary things in my life. Like I have to do a lot of driving my children around Southern California because that's what we do in California. And so, having to go from like this extremely intense thing, and now it's like time to pick up my daughter from school and I gotta go do that. It was very strange. It was probably a strange thing to do. Yeah, and I did it anyway. So, yeah.
We have a question from the spectacular writer Lindsay Wong, who says, "Thank you both. What a terrific event, Liz and Seyward, and congratulations, Liz.
Thanks, Lindsay.
I'm curious how you maintain your momentum or create narrative suspense. I struggle with middles. Thank you."
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm very flattered by that question. I don't know. I think, so for suspense, as soon as I start to feel like I'm losing interest in what I'm doing, I stop doing that thing and I move to the next thing, which is why I wrote this in these this looping structure. So instead of having a linear narrative where you have a baggy middle that you have to fill, I just didn't have a middle. I just kept looping around and tried to maintain like a little bit of a linear line as well. But I do believe in following your energy. So whatever it is that you're feeling excited about, you just do that thing and then hope you can fix the plot holes later. And I did that with amateurs too, and it's, all I did was I leapt from one section to another, so I got tired of a group of people that were characters, and I could see they were gonna start milling around doing meaningless things that had nothing to do with the plot. And so I thought they could just do that off stage, and then I just jumped to another section. And so I just do that by evading the problem altogether, I guess.
And were there any other questions at all from the audience?
I just wanted to know, do you know of twins or are you a twin?
Oh, no, I'm not a twin. I do know of some twins, and but not, I don't have any intimate, I don't think I have any intimate friends who are twins. But I was in a long marriage from when I was 22 until quite recently. And I had some students who were describing I had a lot of students that have been twins, and they were describing their relationship. Wow, I'm saying way too much. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. We're in this now. They were just describing their relationship with their twin, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a marriage to me. So, well, just that you know someone so well that it's sometimes hard, you know, in a long marriage that starts when you're very young. You know, it sometimes becomes hard to know who you are as an individual, and that's all I need. Nothing weird at all. But yes, thank you for that.
Are you a twin?
No, but I do know nieces that are twins. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, twins are really interesting. Mm-hmm.
My mother-in-law's a twin. She's the bad. She's got a twin brother. I won't put her on the spot and make her tell us what being a twin is like, but yeah.
These are bad twins. These are not like the twins you see around you.
And so we do have time for one more question, and we do have a question that's come in via YouTube. That said, if anybody else has a question locally, I can probably squeeze in one more. This person asks, what are your feelings about books being adapted into television series? Because this person had a particularly visual experience while reading.
Oh, well, that's nice. Well, I'm working on an adaptation right now. I'm working on the adaptation for the amateurs, and I like it because you can fix all the things you did wrong in the novel in your screenplay. You have to think about plot differently, and so you have to think about how it just, because it's a dramatic art, you have to think about Chekhov's gun a little bit more differently, like a little bit differently. Everything has to really, you know, if this thing shows up, it has to pay off later. That feels different than writing a novel, which feels a little bit maybe looser and messier to me. And so it just feels like another art form in which to practice plotting, and it's enjoyable. Yeah, and I do try to do a lot of visualizing as I'm writing, so I appreciate you noticing that, whoever you are.
And were there any other local questions? All right, with that in mind, I will turn things over to Seyward and Liz for any final words they might have before Charlene from the Writers Festival comes up. Charlene will mention something about signing, but the only note that I have for you is that we ask you all to remain in your seat just for one moment while we safely transport Liz to a signing table right beside the cash desk, and I'll let you know when you can wander over and get a book signed. That is enough for me. Over to Liz and Seyward.
This is not the safety transfer. We'll all pick her up. I mean, I just want to thank everyone for coming and for asking such great questions and for being here and supporting this wonderful, bold, passionate, exciting writer who happens to be my friend. I'm very lucky about that. So thank you. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And thank you for safely transporting me.
Too early to thank for that. You haven't got there safely yet. A big round of applause, please. Wow, this has been like a most splendid evening. I feel like we've had this this great reading and this really interesting sort of look in on something like a cross between a writing class, writing seminar, and a kind of analysis of really twisted families. I really enjoyed every second of it, and it's just so delightful to hear friends who are also both great writers and really good readers sort of talk at this level about writing and about strategies in writing. So will you please give a big round of applause for Liz and Seyward. Another big round of applause goes to our wonderful hosts here at McNally Robinson. I can't imagine living in a city without this extraordinary place and the warm welcome they make for us here, both at these kinds of events, but also just a place to go in the city to find new books, to meet up with people, to have really good tea, classrooms, all sorts of things. And of course, John, who mostly hides behind the screen here, but who is extraordinarily smooth and gifted at making what is actually kind of a complex task of making hybrid events, making it simple and straightforward so that we can be here in person, but people can also enjoy these events all over everywhere. So thank you to John and thank you to McNally Robinson. I made eye contact. We are always, we as in the festival organization are always really, really happy to be teaming up with McNally Robinson because we get to share our collective love of books. And tonight's gathering is the first of several, not even the first, I think the second of several that we're doing this spring. And so just to bring a couple to your attention, Alyssa York will be here on the 30th, that's next week. Eileen Miles will be here on April 29th. Thomas Wharton will be here on May 27th. Camille Hernandez Ramdour will be here on June 3rd. And Sharon Botella will be here on June 15th. So you can find all of those on the McNally website, as well as our website, Thin Air Winnipeg. And I'd also invite you to be back here on April 29th for the Rites of Spring poetry reading. Amongst the various odd projects we take on with the festival, one of them is a collaboration with Ariel Gordon, who has been masterminding this Rites of Spring project for a while, where we invite Manitoba poets to submit new poems, and the Free Press actually does a full spread for 12 poems, 12 poets. This is probably the only newspaper in Canada, perhaps the world, that does a weekend feature of local poets. I'm really delighted by their support of this project, and we'll be doing a lunch here in the afternoon. So that's going to be really great. And there's often poets that none of us have ever heard of who are just emerging. And that's a really important part of what we do as a community, is to welcome writers in. So one more time to thank Knopf Canada and Penguin Random House for helping this event take place. And to you, Liz, for making what is obviously a devastating but also quite wondrous novel. And you are welcome to stay afterward and get a signed copy. Of course, we have to wait and see how Liz is going to be transported to that signing table. I'm thinking, is there a litter or a wagon or a travois? We're just not sure. And the only reminder is you can get your book signed before you pay for it, but you have to pay for it before you leave the store. They just do that kind of weird thing here, but please join me one more time in thanking our guests today, and just stay put while